Welcome to Book Summary Podcast, your gateway to personal transformation. Each episode delivers big ideas from the world's most impactful books on mindset, productivity, and success, all in just a few minutes. Ready to turn knowledge into action? Let's get started.
Imagine for a moment two vastly different lives. Okay. On one side, you've got this brilliant technology executive, a certified genius, right?
Yeah.
His patents and Wi-Fi routers made him a fortune by his 20s. He sold multiple companies, lived this life of, extraordinary privilege and apparent success.
Yeah.
Yet, our sources tell us he ended up completely broke. His wealth just gone, squandered in a spiral of, erratic behavior.
Wow.
Now, let's flip that coin completely. Picture Ronald Read, an American janitor and gas station attendant from rural Vermont. His life was, by all accounts, incredibly humble, lived in a modest two-bedroom house, never remarried after being widowed, and his main hobby was, famously, chopping firewood. I mean, hardly the picture you'd paint of a financial titan, right?
Not at all. Sounds very ordinary.
Exactly. But when Ronald Read passed away at 92, he made international headlines. Because this unassuming janitor, he left behind an $8 million fortune. Mostly to his local hospital and library.
$8 million from a janitor. That's astonishing.
Isn't it? Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. This is where we take your sources. And today we've got these truly eye-opening excerpts from The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And we really dig in to unearth the most valuable, actionable insights.
And the mission today is pretty fundamental, I think.
It really is. We're exploring an idea that can genuinely transform how you think about your own finances, and honestly, everyone else's too. The concept that when it comes to money, no one's crazy.
Yeah, what's fascinating here, right from the start, is that Housel's core premise, it just directly challenges this deeply ingrained assumption so many of us hold. We tend to believe financial success is primarily about intelligence, right? About having a high IQ or being like a math whiz or understanding complex market stuff.
Right, being smart with money.
Exactly. But Housel argues pretty forcefully that it actually has surprisingly little to do with how smart you are and a whole lot more to do with how you behave. And behavior, as we're about to uncover, is shaped by forces far beyond pure logic or even what we might consider traditional intelligence.
So it's not just about the numbers on the page.
Not at all. This deep dive is really going to illuminate why what looks like, madness or total irrationality to one person makes perfect, even profound sense to another based on their own world.
And as we unpack this foundational idea, really getting into the deep roots of our financial behaviors, we'll naturally start to see how it connects to another crucial concept the author introduces. The intertwined nature of luck and risk.
Ah, yes, the inseparable siblings, as he calls them.
Exactly. It's a theme we're definitely going to explore in even greater detail in a future deep dive because its implications are just vast. But first, let's truly get into why, when it comes to money, no one's crazy. Okay, so let's really dig into this paradox. Housel starts the book, as we mentioned, illustrating this very point through those two incredible contrasting stories. Your natural assumption probably is that financial genius leads to immense wealth, right?
Yeah.
And ordinary jobs lead to, ordinary outcomes.
Seems logical enough.
But Housel's narrative just completely turns that expectation on its head.
It really does. Let's dive a bit deeper into the story of that tech executive. His name isn't given, which is probably for the best, but his story is unforgettable. He truly was, by all accounts, a certified genius. Patented a key component in Wi-Fi routers in his 20s. I mean, just think about the foresight and intellect required for that back then.
Absolutely cutting edge.
And he sold multiple companies for substantial sums. He built a legitimate fortune. It wasn't like he just got lucky once. Yet, the book recounts this truly startling incident. He was seen throwing a brick of cash, literally a brick of cash, at a hotel manager over a disagreement about a $500 lamp.
Wow.
Yeah, apparently offering $5,000 and saying, "Don't ever insult me like that again." I mean, that's such a powerful image, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of unchecked ego, of emotional volatility, just running rampant.
Totally out of control.
And this erratic, emotionally charged behavior wasn't just a one-off incident. We learn that years later, despite all his intelligence and earlier success, he went completely broke. His story is the stark, almost unbelievable reminder that immense intelligence, even, extraordinary business acumen. It just doesn't guarantee financial stability if emotional control and basic good judgment are lacking.
So his genius couldn't save him from himself, essentially.
Precisely. His behavior trumped his brilliance.
And then on the complete other side of that dramatic spectrum, we have Ronald Read, the man who just defied all expectations. The book paints him as this really unassuming figure, an American philanthropist, yes, eventually, but also a janitor, a gas station attendant from rural Vermont.
Quite the contrast.
Right. He was the first in his family to graduate high school, apparently hitchhiking to campus daily. His life was just, by all accounts, incredibly low-key, defined by quiet routine. He fixed cars at a gas station for 25 years, swept floors at JCPenney for 17 years, bought a modest $12,000 two-bedroom house at 38, and lived there for the rest of his life. Never remarried after being widowed at 50.
Sounds like a very simple life.
Extremely simple. A friend even recalled his main hobby was just chopping firewood. He was just Ronald Read, seemingly unremarkable, living this quiet existence.
And that's what makes his outcomes so profoundly surprising, isn't it? When Read died at 92, he genuinely made international headlines because, get this, out of nearly 3 million Americans who died that year, fewer than 4,000 had a net worth over $8 million.
That's a tiny fraction.
A minuscule fraction. And Ronald Read, the janitor, was one of them. He left $2 million to his stepkids and over $6 million to his local hospital and library. I mean, people who knew him were truly baffled. How on earth did he do it?
So what was the secret? Some hidden genius.
Not at all. His secret wasn't complex financial wizardry. It wasn't about timing the market perfectly or picking some obscure hot stocks. He simply saved what little he could. And remember, his income was very modest and invested it consistently in blue chip stocks. Shares of large, well-established, financially sound companies known for their reliability.
The boring stuff, some might say.
Pretty much the boring stuff. And then he just waited. For decades on end, just letting those tiny savings compound grow on themselves into more than $8 million. It really highlights the contrast, doesn't it? Housel mentions Richard Fuscone, a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive praised for his business savvy and sound judgment, who retired super early in his 40s but eventually lost his massive homes to foreclosure.
Wow, the exact opposite trajectory.
Exactly. Read was incredibly patient. Fuscone, it seems, got greedy, took on too much debt, and that difference in behavior alone just completely eclipsed their vast gap in education and financial experience.
So what's the core takeaway here for us, for the listeners? This isn't just about two extreme, isolated anecdotes, right? It highlights a central message from Housel. Doing well with money has remarkably little to do with how smart you are, and a whole lot to do with how you behave.
It really challenges that deep-seated belief, doesn't it? That intelligence is the key.
Totally. A certified genius losing emotional control can be a complete financial disaster. While ordinary folks, maybe with no formal financial education, not a single finance degree between them, they can become incredibly wealthy through just a handful of behavioral skills. Things like patience, consistency, living below their means.
Skills that have absolutely nothing to do with formal intelligence or academic prowess.
Exactly. It's not about mastering complex formulas or algorithms. It's profoundly about the execution, the human element. It's about what you actually do with the money you have, day in, day out, for years.
Right. And this naturally raises a really important question. If behavior is so critical, why do we see such seemingly crazy financial choices all the time? Why would someone so smart, so capable like that tech exec self-destruct financially, while someone so seemingly ordinary like Ronald Read flourishes?
Yeah, what drives these divergent paths?
Well, the simple yet kind of profound answer the author argues for is that our individual behaviors aren't random. They're not just quirks. They're deeply rooted in our unique personal experiences. They make perfect sense to the individual, even if they appear completely irrational or, well, crazy to an outsider looking in. Hashtag the uniqueness of our financial education.
Okay, here's where it gets really, really interesting for me. Our sources stress this idea that everyone has their own unique experience with how the world works. This is the absolute bedrock, the foundation of this whole no one's crazy principle.
It's fundamental. We don't approach financial decisions as, blank slates, purely rational actors. We bring our entire personal history, our entire lived experience, every joy, every fear, every lesson learned the hard way, to every single choice we make about money.
So my money story is different from your money story.
Completely different. Think about it. People from different generations, right?
Yeah.
Raised by different parents who had different incomes and completely different values about money. Living in different parts of the world, born into totally different economies, boom times versus recessions. Experiencing different job markets with varied incentives and, crucially, different degrees of luck. They all learn wildly, fundamentally different lessons about money.
Makes sense.
And what you've personally experienced, what you've lived through, what you felt in your gut, maybe seeing your parents struggle or experiencing a sudden windfall or losing a job unexpectedly, that stuff is far more compelling, far more formative than anything you learn secondhand from a book or a lecture.
Even if that secondhand knowledge is technically correct.
Absolutely. Housel puts it starkly. Your personal experiences, even if they represent maybe only 0.000000001% of what's actually happened in the world, they make up maybe 80% of how you think the world works. It's the inescapable lens through which you filter every single piece of financial information you encounter.
And the author gives some really powerful, stark illustrations of this. Consider these fundamental differences and just imagine how they would irrevocably shape someone's entire financial worldview.
Okay.
Like someone who grew up in extreme poverty, their perception of risk and reward is going to be fundamentally different than, say, the child of a wealthy investment banker, right? Their understanding of what constitutes enough money or what feels like genuine safety would be completely alien to each other. They're operating from vastly different baseline realities.
Totally different mental frameworks.
Or a person who lived through periods of high inflation, say in 1960s or 70s America, where prices literally tripled during their impressionable teens and 20s. They remember the gas lines. They remember their paychecks shrinking in real terms, that relentless, grinding erosion of purchasing power.
What a visceral memory.
Exactly. It's an emotional, visceral experience that a person who grew up with stable prices, like maybe someone born in 1990, simply never had. How could they fully grasp that deep-seated fear of inflation eroding everything? You can explain it, but they haven't felt it.
They haven't felt that anxiety yet.
Or think about the stockbroker who lost everything, or watched families lose everything during the Great Depression. Their understanding of market risk, of volatility, of the potential for utter collapse is profoundly different than, say, a tech worker basking in the late 1990s dot-com boom. That tech worker might see the market as this endless growth machine, almost a guaranteed path to riches.
Two completely opposite experiences of the same market, just at different times.
And even geographically, an Australian who hasn't experienced a recession in like 30 years has a worldview that no American really has, given how much more frequent economic downturns have been in the U.S. These differences in how people have experienced money firsthand, they aren't small nuances. They create completely divergent mental models.
And Housel gives that great example comparing people born in 1970 versus 1950. For someone born in 1970, the S&P 500, that main U.S. stock market index, increased almost tenfold, adjusted for inflation, during their really formative teens and 20s.
Wow, tenfold.
Yeah. So think about the psychological impact of that. That group grew up seeing the stock market as this incredibly reliable engine of wealth creation. But for someone born just 20 years earlier, in 1950, the market went literally nowhere, flatline, during those same impressionable years.
So one group sees stocks always go up, the other sees stocks are risky and go nowhere.
Exactly. Two equally smart groups, technically exposed to the same market over their lives, but with completely different emotional and practical market views based purely on when they experienced it.
So this is really the crux of it, isn't it?
This is the crux. It means that equally smart people, people with the same data, the same news feeds, can profoundly disagree about fundamental things. How recessions happen, how you should invest, what financial goals to prioritize, even how much risk is acceptable.
And it's not about who's smarter or who has better information.
Not fundamentally. It's because we've all had different lives, shaped by equally persuasive, equally personal experiences. What seems absolutely crazy to you, what appears completely irrational based on your life, might make perfect logical sense to me because my life has taught me entirely different lessons about how money works, how the world works.
There's that powerful, almost chilling example Housel uses from the Great Depression.
Yep.
The historian Frederick Lewis Allen wrote that the Depression marked millions of Americans inwardly for the rest of their lives. It left this indelible scar, this deep-seated fear and caution.
A whole generation shaped by trauma.
Exactly. But then you have John F. Kennedy, running for president decades later. When asked about his memories of the Depression, he famously remarked, quite honestly, "I have no first-hand knowledge of the Depression. My family had one of the great fortunes of the world, and it was worth more than ever then. We had bigger houses, more servants, we traveled more.
A completely different reality.
Totally. He said, about the only thing that I saw directly was when my father hired some extra gardeners just to give them a job so they could eat. I really did not learn about the Depression until I read about it at Harvard.
And that just illustrates such a crucial point. No amount of studying, no amount of academic open-mindedness can truly replicate the emotional power of fear, uncertainty, or profound loss that comes from lived experience.
You can't study your way into feeling that kind of fear.
You really can't. Those who live through something like the Depression carry emotional scars, as Housel calls them, that fundamentally alter their perspective. They see the world through a completely different lens than someone who merely reads about it in a textbook. And this is why others' financial actions, though they might seem crazy to an outsider like us, are often deeply rational for them, given their internal narrative built on that personal history.
It's their logic based on their life.
Precisely. It's also why someone like Bill Gross, the famous bond fund manager, he openly admitted he probably wouldn't be where he is today if he'd been born a decade earlier or later. His entire career perfectly coincided with this generational collapse in interest rates, which made bonds incredibly lucrative investments for decades.
He rode the wave.
He absolutely rode the wave. So to him, bonds were these amazing wealth-generating machines. But to his father's generation, who endured high inflation and rising interest rates that crushed bond values, bonds might have seemed like, wealth incinerators. It's all about your personal timeline, your personal market experience. No one's crazy. They just experience a different slice of history. Hashtag, the lottery ticket paradox.
Okay, to really drive this home and maybe challenge some of our own assumptions, let's look at an example that seems, well, on the surface, utterly irrational to many people. Lottery tickets.
Ah, the lottery. Always a controversial one.
Right. Americans collectively spend more money on lottery tickets than they do on movies, video games, music, sporting events, and books combined.
That statistic is always staggering when you hear it. Just the sheer volume of money.
It's enormous. Pouring into something with, let's be honest, mathematically terrible odds of winning big.
And the demographic data makes it even more striking and frankly a bit heartbreaking in some ways. The lowest income households, on average, spend around $412 a year on lottery tickets.
$412.
Yeah. And that's 4 times the amount spent by those in the highest income groups. This is particularly poignant when you remember that other statistic, that a significant percentage of Americans, around 40%, cannot come up with $400 cash for an emergency.
So the same people who likely can't cover a basic emergency expense are, paradoxically, spending that exact amount or more on something with a 1 in millions chance of a payout.
Exactly. That, to many of us, especially those maybe with some financial education or a comfortable income, seems absolutely crazy. It seems like the definition of a poor financial decision.
You look at that and think, why would you possibly do that?
Right. To someone from a higher income bracket, it can be just mind-boggling. But Housel invites us to strain a little, as he puts it, to try and imagine the subconscious reasoning, the why behind such a choice, from their perspective.
Okay, let's try. What might that thinking sound like?
Well, the narrative from that perspective, if we really try to inhabit it, might go something like this. Look, we live paycheck to paycheck, saving significant money, building a real emergency fund, investing for retirement, seeing our money actually grow in a meaningful way. Those prospects feel almost impossibly far away for us.
Like climbing an unclimbable mountain.
Yeah. Our chances for much higher wages or big career advancement seem equally out of reach. We can't afford the nice vacations you take, the new cars you drive, the comprehensive health insurance you have, or homes in safe neighborhoods. Much of the good stuff in life that you people who read finance books either have now or have a pretty good chance of getting eventually, we simply don't see a path to. So, for us, buying a lottery ticket, it isn't just about the minuscule chance of winning the jackpot. It's the only time in our lives, maybe all week, that we get to hold a tangible dream, even just for a few days, of getting all that good stuff that you already have and probably take for granted. We are paying for a dream. We're buying a moment of hope, a flicker of possibility in an otherwise difficult life. And you may not understand that because, frankly, you're already living a version of that dream. That's why we buy more tickets than you do.
Okay. Now, look, you don't have to agree with the financial logic there. And from a purely mathematical, objective standpoint, Buying lottery tickets when you're broke is still a very bad financial strategy. There's no getting around that.
Absolutely. The math is clear.
But this explanation, this act of straining to understand,
Yeah.
it really uncovers the true root of so many financial decisions, doesn't it? They're not made purely with a spreadsheet, completely devoid of human emotion or deep aspiration or even desperation.
No, they're made at the dinner table, like Housel says, or in company meetings, or in quiet moments of hope or fear, where your personal history, your unique worldview, your ego, your pride, maybe even odd incentives from your job or social group, they all get scrambled together into a narrative that works for you.
A narrative that makes sense in your world.
Exactly. It makes seemingly irrational behavior at the very least comprehensible. It allows you to see the internal logic, even if you disagree with the external outcome. And it removes that immediate judgment of just calling it crazy. Hashtag the newbie factor in modern finance.
So beyond our individual experiences shaping us, our sources highlight another really crucial reason why our financial behaviors can sometimes seem crazy, or, maybe more accurately, just plain struggling. And that's the fact that many of the fundamental financial concepts and tools we're navigating today are incredibly new.
That's such an important point. We often operate without a long, deep history of collective wisdom or, inherited family strategies for these things. We are, in many ways, pioneers in a rapidly changing landscape.
Give us an example.
Okay, consider retirement as we think of it today, this idea that everyone deserves or is entitled to a dignified post-work life, financially secure and free from labor. This widespread concept is, at most, maybe 2 generations old.
Really? Only 2 generations?
Pretty much. Before World War II, most Americans simply worked until they died. Social Security, when it started, the initial benefits were minimal, barely a safety net. The average check didn't exceed $1,000 a month, adjusted for inflation, until the 1980s.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't really until the 1980s that this idea of a dignified retirement for everyone, and crucially the expectation that everyone would personally save and invest their own money for it, truly took hold as a widespread societal norm. This is a very recent and pretty profound shift in societal expectation and individual responsibility.
And the tools we're supposed to use to achieve that retirement.
Also brand new, relatively speaking, the 401k, which is now the cornerstone savings vehicle for American retirement, allowing you to contribute pre-tax dollars to grow tax-deferred. It didn't even exist until 1978.
1978. That's younger than a lot of our listeners.
Exactly. And the Roth IRA, which is fantastic with its tax-free withdrawals in retirement, that wasn't born until 1998, barely old enough to legally drink. These are not ancient, deeply embedded systems passed down through generations of family wisdom. They're relatively young, and we're all still, collectively, figuring out the best ways to use them.
So we're kind of learning on the fly.
We are, and the same applies to financing college education. The share of Americans with a bachelor's degree has just skyrocketed, right? From less than 1 in 20 back in 1940 to maybe 1 in 4 more recently. And over that same time, tuition has risen over 4-fold, even after adjusting for inflation.
The costs are insane.
They are. So why do so many people make what appear in hindsight to be poor student loan decisions, taking on absolutely crippling debt?
Oh.
Partly because there just isn't decades of accumulated experience or clear societal guidelines to learn from. We've largely been winging it as a society when it comes to financing higher education at this scale and cost.
It makes sense. We didn't have generations before us dealing with 6-figure student loans.
Precisely. Even things we take for granted now, like index funds, a cornerstone of passive investing that many financial advisors recommend they're less than 50 years old. And widespread consumer credit card debt, mortgages as we know them, that really only took off after World War II. Our entire financial landscape is constantly shifting under our feet, making it incredibly difficult to rely solely on historical precedent or inherited wisdom for many modern financial dilemmas.
So what does this all mean for us, the listeners, as we're trying to navigate our own financial lives today?
Well, I think it means we should give ourselves and others a bit of a break. We're genuinely not crazy for struggling with these relatively new concepts, for feeling a bit overwhelmed sometimes, or for making decisions that, maybe in hindsight seem less than optimal.
It's okay to not have all the answers.
Absolutely. We're all just newbies in many respects, as Housel puts it. Our collective financial journey is, in so many ways, an ongoing experiment. The rules are still being written, the best practices are still evolving. We don't have the benefit of our grandparents' or great-grandparents' wisdom on how to best manage a 401k or navigate massive student loan debt, because those things simply didn't exist for them in the same way.
We're forging new paths.
We are. And that inherent uncertainty, that lack of deep historical context for our specific tools and challenges, inevitably influences our behavior, sometimes in ways that might look off from a purely theoretical standpoint.
Okay, so this profound insight that our personal histories, our unique experiences, and even the relative newness of our financial tools deeply shape our actions leads us directly into another really compelling idea from our sources. And that's the notion that when making financial decisions is often more effective, more sustainable, to aim for being reasonable rather than being coldly rational.
Right. This might sound a bit counterintuitive at first, especially in a field like finance that often seems like it should be all about pure mathematics and logic. But it connects directly back to why people do what they do, and more importantly, what they can actually stick with over time.
So reasonable is better than perfectly logical.
Housel argues yes in practice. He suggests that reasonable is not just more realistic, but it's actually crucial because you have a far better chance of sticking with a reasonable approach for the long run. And when managing money, that long-term consistency is what matters most, way more than short-term optimization that you abandon at the first sign of trouble.
Okay, sticking with the plan is key.
Exactly. Adopting a reasonable approach means acknowledging the human element, our emotions, our psychological limits, our need for comfort, rather than striving for some mathematically perfect strategy that might feel completely unbearable emotionally. And to really illustrate this point, our sources give us this truly wild and historically significant medical story.
Oh yeah, this one was fascinating. Tell us about it.
Okay, picture this. Julius Wagner Jauregg. He was a 19th century Austrian psychiatrist. His specialty was treating severe neurosyphilis, which back then was basically a death sentence. Absolutely no known cure. A terrifying, hopeless situation for patients and doctors alike.
Grim starting point.
Very grim. But he noticed this intriguing, if kind of anecdotal pattern. Occasionally, some syphilis patients seemed to recover, or at least improve significantly, if they also happened to contract some other illness that caused prolonged high fevers.
A fever seemed to help.
That was the observation. So he jumped to what was, for his time, a drastic yet, in a certain brutal sense, logical conclusion. He began intentionally injecting patients with low-end strains of diseases like typhoid, malaria, even smallpox.
Infected them on purpose.
Yes, to deliberately induce fevers strong enough, he hoped, to kill the syphilis bacterium. Now, as you can imagine, this was incredibly dangerous. It was radical, and some patients tragically died from the treatment itself.
That's horrifying.
It is, by modern standards. But he eventually refined his technique, settling on a controlled, weak version of malaria. The malaria would cause these bone-rattling fevers for a few days, and then, crucially, he could cure the malaria itself with quinine. And his audacious, terrifying experiment actually worked.
It worked.
He reported that about 6 out of 10 patients treated this way recovered from the otherwise fatal neurosyphilis, compared to maybe 3 out of 10 who were left untreated. It was groundbreaking. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1927 for this work.
Wow, okay. That's quite a story. How does this connect back to finance?
Well, fast forward to today and compare this to how we generally treat fevers now. We have abundant scientific evidence showing that fevers are actually beneficial, right? They help turn on the immune system, they slow down virus replication, they generally lead to better overall outcomes in fighting infections. Seattle Children's Hospital even explicitly educates parents that normal fevers between 100 degrees and 104 degrees Fahrenheit are good for sick children.
Okay, so fevers are technically good for us when we're sick.
Scientifically, yes. Yet, what do we almost universally do? What's the first instinct when you or your kid gets a fever?
Reach for the Tylenol or ibuprofen. Knock it down.
Exactly. Fevers are almost universally seen as a bad thing, something to be treated quickly, almost instinctively. Why the disconnect? If fevers are scientifically beneficial, even good for fighting illness, why do we fight them so universally, so aggressively?
Yeah.
The simple answer, as Housel points out, is brutally human. Fevers hurt, and people don't want to hurt. A doctor's goal isn't just to cure the underlying disease, but to do so within the bounds of what's reasonable and tolerable to the patient. It might be purely rational, in a cold scientific sense, to want to endure a fever if you have an infection because you know it's helping your body fight it off.
But it feels awful.
Exactly. It's not reasonable from a human perspective when you're shivering uncontrollably under a blanket, your body is aching all over, and you just want the pain and the misery to stop. Patient comfort matters. And this philosophy, this prioritizing of the reasonable, the tolerable over the purely rational, is deeply, profoundly applicable to how we should think about managing our money.
Okay, I see the connection now. So what does this mean for our investments, our saving strategies?
Well, academic finance, the kind taught in universities, often seeks these mathematically optimal strategies. Precise formulas designed to maximize expected returns for a given level of risk, all calculated beautifully on paper.
The efficient frontier and all that.
Exactly. But in the real world, Housel argues, people don't necessarily want the mathematically optimal strategy. They want the strategy that maximizes for how well they sleep at night. That feeling of comfort, that emotional resilience, that sense of peace knowing you won't be completely wiped out, that can be far more valuable in practice than squeezing out an extra hypothetical percentage point of return, especially if chasing that extra point means adopting a strategy that causes you constant anxiety and leads you to panic and bail at the worst possible time.
So the sleep at night factor is actually a crucial part of the equation.
It's arguably the most crucial part for long-term success because it determines whether you can actually stick with the plan. Hashtag minimizing regret in practice.
And this concept of sleeping well at night, or maybe framing it as minimizing future regret, is beautifully illustrated by, of all people, Nobel laureate Harry Markowitz.
Yeah, the father of modern portfolio theory himself.
Right. The guy who won the Nobel Prize for his incredibly influential work on the mathematical trade-off between risk and return, basically figuring out how to build the most theoretically efficient investment portfolios. So when he was once asked how Harry Markowitz, invested his own money.
You'd expect some super complex, optimized allocation.
You would. But he described simply splitting his retirement contributions 50-50 between bonds and equities, just half in stocks, half in bonds. And his stated intention, it wasn't maximizing expected return. It was, in his words, to minimize my future regret.
That's fascinating.
Isn't it? He wanted to minimize regretting missing out on a big market surge if he was too conservative, too many bonds, or regretting being fully invested in a crash if he was too aggressive, too many stocks. It was an emotional hedge.
That goal, minimizing future regret, it's incredibly hard to rationalize purely on paper with cold numbers, isn't it? It's an emotional calculation, not a financial one, fundamentally.
Totally. But it's incredibly easy to justify in real life. We make financial decisions not just based on isolated numbers in a vacuum. We make them surrounded by coworkers. We might consciously or not want to impress, or spouses we don't want to disappoint, or just our own internal doubts and fears that gnaw at us late at night.
Investing isn't just a solitary, purely logical exercise you do on a spreadsheet. It has this crucial social and emotional component that pure mathematics often ignores entirely.
Yeah, like that truly rational strategy Hals mentions. It was proposed by some Yale researchers.
Oh, the leverage one. Yeah, that's a wild example.
Right. They suggested that young savers should use 2-to-1 margin, meaning they should borrow $2 for every $1 of their own money they invest to supercharge their retirement accounts early on.
Leveraging up their retirement savings. Sounds risky.
Extremely. The researchers showed mathematically that even if a massive 50% market drop completely wiped out their leveraged account, they'd still mathematically be better off in the long term if, this is a huge if they picked themselves back up, dusted themselves off, and kept saving aggressively in that same leveraged account the very next day, sticking to the plan.
Right. The math worked perfectly on paper, in a theoretical vacuum, assuming perfect rationality and zero emotional reaction.
But it's absurdly unreasonable in practice, isn't it? Can you imagine any normal human being watching their entire retirement account evaporate because of leverage, and then just calmly continuing undeterred the very next day, following the exact same risky plan as if nothing happened?
Absolutely not. They'd quit in disgust. They'd probably swear off stocks forever. They might look for drastically different, much safer options, maybe even sue their financial advisor if they had one.
Exactly. It highlights that something can be technically mathematically true, but contextually, humanly complete nonsense in the world of finance. The goal isn't just surviving the numbers, it's surviving psychologically. You need a strategy you can actually live with through the inevitable ups and downs.
Which leads Housel to this powerful, if slightly touchy-feely sounding idea. You should love your investments.
Yeah, that sounds a bit emotional, maybe even unprofessional to some ears, like a self-help mantra for finance or something.
It does sound that way initially. But his point is, if that love, or maybe call it comfort, conviction, belief, if that emotional attachment provides the commitment and the endurance you need to stick with a strategy during the lean years, The inevitable downturns, the periods when your strategy is underperforming, the times when everyone else is panicking and selling, then that emotional connection is actually a quantifiable, measurable advantage.
Because it keeps you invested.
Precisely. He points out the historical odds of making money in the broad U.S. stock market are astonishingly 100% over any 20-year period in history. So anything that keeps you in the game for the long haul, anything that prevents you from panicking and selling at the bottom, anything that helps you maintain your conviction and keep investing through thick and thin, has a profound, almost incalculable advantage over time.
Okay, so loving your strategy helps you stick with it, and sticking with it is paramount. Makes sense.
And this principle of prioritizing the reasonable over the purely rational helps explain other seemingly irrational financial behaviors too. Take home bias, for example, the tendency for people to heavily invest in companies from their own country.
Yeah, most financial theory says you should diversify globally.
Right. From a purely rational diversification standpoint, concentrating your investments geographically isn't optimal. You miss out on global growth opportunities and increase country-specific risk. But Housel argues it's perfectly reasonable if that familiarity, that comfort with domestic companies, helps you take the initial leap of faith to invest, makes you feel more comfortable holding those investments, and crucially, helps you commit to staying invested during global turmoil.
So the behavioral benefit of comfort outweighs the theoretical benefit of perfect diversification.
It can, if it keeps you invested. Or think about day trading. For most individual investors, the odds are heavily stacked against success due to fees, taxes, and competing against professionals. So rationally, most people shouldn't do it.
Yeah, it's usually a losing game.
But Housel suggests maybe it can be reasonable in small, controlled amounts of money you can afford to lose if it scratches an itch, provides an engaging hobby, satisfies a desire for action, and crucially, keeps you from constantly tinkering and messing with your core, diversified, long-term investment portfolio.
Like a play money account to keep you from doing damage to the serious money.
Exactly. Even making forecasts about the market or the economy. We know, rationally, that most economic and market forecasts are notoriously inaccurate. Yet people constantly make them and consume them. Why? Because it's arguably reasonable, it's deeply human nature, to want to understand and anticipate the future, to try and make sense of uncertainty, even if acting decisively on those flawed forecasts is usually dangerous.
We want to feel like we have some control, some foresight.
Precisely. And there's that great, very human anecdote Housel shares about Jack Bogle. The legendary founder of Vanguard, the ultimate champion of low-cost index investing, arguably the most rational investing approach ever devised for the masses.
The patron saint of passive investing.
Right. Even he apparently invested some of his own money in his son's high-fee hedge fund, which seems completely contrary to his entire philosophy.
Totally inconsistent.
And his explanation was beautifully simple and human. We do some things for family reasons. Life isn't always consistent. It's just a perfect, almost endearing example of the reasonable overriding the strictly rational. Personal relationships, values, emotions, they often legitimately and understandably override purely mathematical optimization in the real world. And recognizing this is absolutely key to understanding real-world financial behavior, both your own and everyone else's.
Okay, so as we've really explored our individual experiences, these big generational shifts in finance, and our very human need for reasonable decisions, not just purely rational ones, they all deeply shape our financial lives. And this brings us quite naturally to another powerful and maybe often overlooked factor that profoundly influences our outcomes. The inseparable siblings, as Housel calls them, luck and risk.
Yes. These are the forces that are always at play, whether we choose to acknowledge them or not. They often dictate the boundaries of what's even possible, regardless of our skill, our effort, or our intelligence.
It's the stuff that happens to us, not just by us.
Exactly. The author states it very plainly and I think powerfully. Luck and risk are both the reality that every outcome in life is guided by forces other than individual effort. It's not just about what you do, how hard you work, or how smart you are. It's also fundamentally about what happens to you along the way, the hand you're dealt by circumstance.
And that NYU professor, Scott Galloway, has that great quote, Housel includes.
Oh, yeah. Nothing is as good or as bad as it seems. Which is such a perfect reminder, isn't it? To look beyond the immediate surface results, extreme success or extreme failure, and consider the broader, often unseen context of external forces, of luck and risk.
Let's revisit that story of Bill Gates in his early days because it really illuminates this concept so clearly.
It's a fantastic illustration.
Okay, so Gates, as many people know, went to one of the only high schools in the entire world at the time that had a computer. Lakeside School in Seattle. This was 1968.
1968, think about that. Even most university graduate schools didn't have a computer anywhere near as advanced or, crucially, as accessible as the one Lakeside somehow got their hands on.
It wasn't just a slight edge he had.
Not at all. Housel calls it a 1 in a million head start. This incredible fortune allowed him and his friend Paul Allen to literally just toy with this machine at their leisure, after school, late into the night, on weekends, just letting their creativity run wild, honing skills that would literally define the future of technology.
Skills almost no one else their age could possibly acquire at that time.
Right. And Gates himself later said, quite emphatically, if there had been no Lakeside, there would have been no Microsoft. His extraordinary intelligence, his relentless hard work, his visionary thinking, these are all absolutely undeniable parts of the story. But so is this incredible, almost statistically impossible stroke of good luck.
Being in the right place at the exact right, incredibly rare time.
Precisely. Now, for the truly stark and honestly quite poignant contrast, Bill Gates had a very close friend back then, Kent Evans. He was in that same small group of computer prodigies at Lakeside.
Okay, part of the same lucky group.
Yes. And Gates described Evans as the best student in their class, equally skilled with computers, and sharing Gates's own intense business mind and seemingly endless ambition. They even apparently schemed together about running companies, fantasizing about the future empires they'd build.
Wow, so he was right there with Gates and Allen.
Right there. Gates later reflected, with what sounds like a clear sense of loss, we would have kept working together. I'm sure we would have gone to college together. Kent Evans, by all accounts, could very easily have been a founding partner of Microsoft, a peer to Gates and Allen in shaping the company.
But something happened.
But it never happened. Kent Evans died tragically in a mountaineering accident before he even graduated high school.
Oh my God, how awful.
Just terrible. And here's the chilling part, Housel highlights. The odds of a teenager being killed in a mountaineering accident are, quite chillingly, roughly 1 in a million.
1 in a million. The same probability.
The exact same statistical improbability that put Bill Gates in front of that cutting-edge computer at Lakeside during a period when almost no one else his age on the planet had such access. 1 in a million luck for Gates, paving the way for Microsoft. 1 in a million risk for Evans, tragically ending his potential before it could truly blossom.
Wow. The same force, same magnitude, opposite directions.
Exactly. And this is the core insight that Housel really wants us to grasp about luck and risk. Bill Gates experienced unimaginable 1 in a million good luck by ending up at Lakeside when he did. Kent Evans experienced equally unimaginable 1 in a million bad luck or risk by never getting the chance to finish what he and Gates started. It's the same magnitude of external influence working in diametrically opposite directions.
It really drives home that idea. Housel says you are one person in a game with 7 billion other people and infinite moving parts.
Yeah. The accidental impact of actions and events completely outside of your control, the sheer randomness of life, can sometimes be far more consequential for your ultimate outcome than the decisions you consciously take, even if you have the most brilliant mind or the best laid plans.
So this raises an important, maybe even slightly uncomfortable question then. If luck and risk are so obviously, profoundly impactful, why do we humans struggle so much to give them their proper respect? Why do we often downplay their role, especially when we look at financial success? Why do we tend to default to seeing outcomes as purely the result of individual effort or smarts or grit?
Well, part of it is deeply psychological, isn't it? When we judge others, attributing their success primarily to luck can make you sound, well, jealous or mean-spirited or dismissive. Even if intellectually we know luck must have played a part, it feels better, maybe more polite, to laud their skill and hard work instead.
Right, it feels like diminishing their achievement.
Exactly. And when we judge ourselves, attributing our own successes mainly to luck can be just too demoralizing to fully accept. We much prefer to believe that our efforts, our intelligence, our sheer grit alone were responsible for the good outcomes. It validates our sense of agency and competence.
We want to feel like we earned it, that we controlled it.
We do. We're also incredibly prone to what psychologists call survivorship bias. We tend to only see the winners, right? The wildly successful individuals or companies that survived and thrived. And we try desperately to emulate their specific methods, their specific strategies, often forgetting the countless others who took very similar paths, worked just as hard, were just as smart, but simply met with bad luck or unforeseen risks and failed.
We don't study the failures as much.
Rarely with the same intensity. We prefer simple, clean stories about clear cause and effect. He did X, so he got Y. Even if those stories are often misleading because they completely ignore the vast, messy complexities of luck and risk that were swirling around.
And our sources point out, with maybe a healthy dose of cynicism, that the cover of Forbes magazine does not celebrate poor investors who made good decisions but happened to experience the unfortunate side of risk.
No, you definitely won't read a cover story about the brilliant, diligent investor whose meticulously researched, perfectly diversified portfolio got completely wiped out by some unpredictable, once-in-a-century event like a pandemic or a war. That's not an inspiring story. Right. But as Housel says, Forbes almost certainly will celebrate rich investors who made merely okay or maybe even objectively reckless decisions and just happened to get incredibly lucky with timing or circumstance.
So the stories we consume are heavily biased towards lucky success.
Absolutely. And this completely skews our perception of what truly works and what doesn't. It leads us to incorrectly attribute extreme success solely to skill and genius, and extreme failure solely to bad decisions or lack of intelligence, when in reality, luck and risk are often the dominant yet invisible factors driving those extreme outcomes at either end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
We're constantly being misled by the narratives we naturally gravitate towards.
So what's the practical implication of recognizing this bias?
Well, this is why Housel argues quite strongly that we should focus less on specific individuals and case studies, especially the extreme ones, and more on broad patterns.
Look at the averages, not just the outliers.
Exactly. Extreme outcomes, think billionaire founders or people who lost everything overnight, are far more likely to have been heavily influenced by extreme luck or extreme risk. This actually makes their specific stories, their specific lessons, less broadly applicable to most of our lives. We can't reliably replicate someone else's luck, so studying only the extremely fortunate might not provide truly actionable takeaways for our own more ordinary financial journeys. It's often better to study the average, consistent successes, the people who got wealthy slowly through repeatable behaviors.
And that legendary investor, Warren Buffett, had that great quote Housel uses.
Yes. Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose.
That's so true, isn't it? When things are going extremely well, when the market's just booming and your investments are flying high, it's incredibly easy to feel invincible, to believe your own brilliance is the sole driver, and to completely forget the role of external forces, like, a rising tide lifting all boats or just plain good fortune.
Success makes us overconfident and blinds us to risk. But Housel points out the opposite is also profoundly true and often much more painful. Failure can also be a lousy teacher.
How so?
Well, failure can make smart people think their decisions were absolutely terrible, that they completely messed up, when sometimes they simply faced the unforgiving realities of risk. Maybe they made a perfectly reasonable decision based on the information available, but then an unexpected, low-probability negative event occurred. Bad luck struck.
So you beat yourself up for something that wasn't really your fault.
Exactly. It's incredibly hard, maybe impossible sometimes, to objectively pick apart precisely how much of a negative outcome was due to a genuinely bad decision versus just a random, unpredictable roll of the dice. We tend to take too much credit for success and too much blame for failure.
So what's the practical takeaway from all this talk about luck and risk? How should it change how we manage our finances?
The key practical takeaway, Housel argues, is to consciously arrange your financial life, your savings rate, your investment strategy, your debt levels, even your career choices in such a way that a bad investment or a missed financial goal or a sudden economic downturn or just a plain old stroke of bad luck won't wipe you out entirely.
Build in resilience. Build in a margin of safety.
Precisely. You need enough room for error to allow you to keep playing the game, to stay in the game long enough through the inevitable setbacks until the odds, hopefully, eventually fall in your favor. It really reinforces that core idea from Scott Galloway. Nothing is as good or as bad as it seems. There's always more to the story, always more contributing factors, especially luck and risk, than meets the immediate eye. Having humility about that is crucial. #tag
Wow. Okay, today we've taken a really deep dive into this profound, maybe even liberating idea from Morgan Housel that no one's crazy when it comes to money. We've seen how our unique life experiences everything from the generational scars of the Great Depression to the surprisingly recent rise of things like the 401k fundamentally shape our financial worldview.
Yeah, in ways that often appear crazy or irrational to others, but are perfectly reasonable, maybe even deeply logical from within our own personal context.
And we explored why aiming for reasonable often triumphs over striving for coldly rational in the messy, unpredictable, very human-centered world of money. Acknowledging our emotions, our social context, our need to sleep at night, that's just as vital as any spreadsheet.
It's all about finding a strategy you can actually stick with for the long haul, rather than chasing some theoretical perfection that's psychologically impossible to maintain when things get tough.
And then, as we wrapped up this rich discussion, we introduced those powerful, inseparable siblings, luck and risk, using that compelling, almost haunting story of Bill Gates and Ken Evans.
Yeah, that really illustrates how outcomes are often guided by forces well beyond our individual effort, even beyond genius.
And that understanding is so critical, isn't it? Because it means we need to approach our financial decisions not with arrogance or certainty, but with a healthy dose of humility, a deep appreciation for the unpredictable elements always at play.
Recognizing that our individual efforts, however important, are just one part of a much larger, much more complex, and often quite random game.
So in our next deep dive, we're going to go even further into this intricate, fascinating dance of luck and risk. We'll explore its hidden influences on how we judge wealth, how we perceive success and failure, and what it truly means to build a genuinely resilient financial life in a world that's just full of constant surprises.
It's a crucial topic. Get ready to challenge even more of your assumptions about what drives financial outcomes.
Absolutely.
And maybe to leave you with something truly provocative to ponder until then, consider that famous Sherlock Holmes observation. The world is full of obvious things which nobody, by any chance, ever observes. How many of the obvious financial truths you hold dear right now, the ones you take completely for granted as universal laws, how many of those are actually just a reflection of your own unique, limited experiences? Your specific generation, your personal accidental exposure to luck and risk along the way.
Rather than being truly universal truths.
Exactly. And what profound insights, what potentially transformative understanding might you gain if you dared to look beyond those personal lenses and really tried to see the bigger picture? Something to think about.
Thanks for tuning in to the Book Summary Podcast. If you found value in today's episode, hit that like button, subscribe for more summaries, and share it with someone who's ready to grow. Want deeper insights, exclusive book notes, and reading tips? Join our free newsletter. The link's in the description. And don't forget, if you'd like to read the full book, our affiliate link is right below. It helps support the channel and keeps the summaries coming. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing.